Okay. So what's the adolescent perspective on transition? You know, sometimes they have competing demands and interests. Sometimes the transition gets bogged down in the struggle for autonomy. You know, children, adolescents with special health care needs would sometimes would really appreciate meeting an adult with the condition that they have. And kind of, you know, we know that peer-to-peer support and education can be quite powerful and helpful. And, you know, we understand that transition to new health professionals can be a scary prospect, that, you know, you've had a long-term relationship with your childhood physician, and to start over again, to kind of educate a new doctor about the subtleties and uniqueness of your health and body is very daunting. Okay. So, you know, people have looked at transition, have studied or have talked about stages of transition, and you know, even at the time of diagnosis, anticipating there's going to be a future when we're going to need to change from pediatric to adult-based healthcare teams. And then preteen being the time when to look at, you know, what self-care skills are possible or likely, and what's the decision-making capacity of this emerging adult, and then finally the actual time of transition. Okay. So in general, when we're talking about primary care, physicians whose formal training have included both children and adults are generally more comfortable with providing care to adults with developmental disabilities. So who we're talking about are family physicians who are trained to provide care throughout the lifespan, and then internal medicine / pediatrics whose training includes both children and adults. And of course, the more the larger the number of patients with a specific condition, the more comfortable that physician becomes with that condition. You know, they may become more familiar with comorbid conditions seen with that developmental diagnosis. They may become more familiar with resources that are helpful for individuals and families with that diagnosis. And that's where, to answer your question, you know, knowing the specifics of your adolescent or young adult child's conditions, and seeing if anyone within the same family health center is already seeing patients with that condition can be very helpful. And then the other thing is, you know, those physicians who have children or adult children, you know, pediatric children or adult children with developmental disabilities or with rare conditions can, of course, be, you know, good providers because they've lived the experience, they know about resources, and they can, you know, speak from personal experience. Okay. These are slides that relate to a survey that was conducted in the Cincinnati area about adult providers. Next slide. And Um, so these adult physicians were asked how comfortable they feel providing health care for a 21-year-old with this list of conditions, and then how many patients with this diagnosis have you seen in the last year? 0, 1 to 5, or more than 5. Okay? Again. And so you can see breaking down by pediatrics, internal medicine, family medicine, and med peds. In general, what you see are those physicians who were trained in both internal medicine and pediatrics generally have, among adult providers, generally have the greatest comfort with providing care to adults with ADHD, autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, Fragile X, Klinefelter's, intellectual disabilities, spina bifida, and Turner syndrome. In general, those trained only in adult care, that is internal medicine, have the least comfort with these developmental conditions. Again, you can have exceptions to, this trend. So if you have an internist who has a child with autism, they may be very expert at providing health care to adults with autism. And so that's where you need to know locally what are the comfort levels and expertise of the physicians in the specific health center where your young adult child is receiving care. Okay. And then you see, when we're talking about pure medical illnesses like Crohn's disease or like epilepsy or sickle cell disease, the differences in comfort level between the adult health providers is much less. So when we're talking about, in general, non-neurodevelopmental disabilities, the differences between adult providers is a lot less. You see a much more difference in comfort levels when we're talking about neurodevelopmental disabilities. And, no surprise, the more patients that individual adult providers have with a given condition, the more comfortable they are providing care. And again, like our experience with this recent study over the past year is there are a few, adult providers in the Cleveland Clinic system who have 5 or 10 adults with Down syndrome in their practices. So, they're comfortable taking care of people with that condition. I've seen over my career, many hundreds of adults with Down syndrome. But the vast majority of internists or family physicians in the Cleveland Clinic system happen to have just one adult with Down syndrome. So they're kind of nervous about that. They're wanting to do the right thing. They know they need health care, but they need support. Okay? So how do you find new providers? Family advocacy groups can be very helpful. Upside of Downs, if you have a young adult, Upside of Downs can help guide you. Word of mouth, county boards can sometimes help. Advocacy agencies like the ARC of Greater Cleveland. Often it's easier to find new providers when your young adult or adolescent is still on family insurance. You know, it's important to know, are there physical access issues? There shouldn't be, but we know that sometimes buildings where healthcare is delivered are not always meeting the ADA requirements, and physical access can be a problem. Okay. So, you know, one issue is, again, transition is not just finding adult primary care and, if necessary, specialty care physicians. It's about also teaching your adolescent and young adult to do as much of their self-management of their health as possible. Teach back is just a way to assess understanding. So you provide information to someone, and the teach back method very simply is to say, just to make sure that I spoke clearly with you, can you tell me in your own words what we just talked about? Or can you tell me in your own words, or can you show me how to check your blood sugar, you know, how to take your medication? So that's the teach back method. Okay. And of course, you know, every adolescent is unique in terms of their self-management capacities and skills, and sometimes people may appear to understand, but when you ask them to do a certain health care related task, they can't do it, or they have trouble understanding it. And so you have to, you know, make sure they can do it, not just say that they can do it. Okay? You know, in terms of decision making and self-management, not everyone can be fully independent or fully self-manage. And so, you know, one theme is to see what kind of support does it take to optimize self-management, even if people can't be fully autonomous and fully independent. Thinking that through. Okay. So, you know, here's an example, and I think, Amy, you said you were going to provide a example of something like this, but these are typical skills that that you might consider in planning out what an adolescent or young adult needs to learn in order to function safely. And, you know, having some kind of system that's reliable in terms of, say, self-administration of medication. Okay? And then there are all kinds of devices that can be prompts or cues, reminders to take medication at the right time. Okay? And so in terms of, you know, what are the kinds of services that transition clinics offer, you know, one aspect to always remember and consider are not just physical health needs and medical needs, but mental health needs. And, you know, some of these health systems that have these highly developed transition structures, their clinics, you know, include not just primary care physicians and specialty physicians, but also people who provide mental health care and or are very familiar with mental health resources in the community specific to people with special health care needs. These transition clinics often have a very holistic view of transition and do inquire about and provide some assistance or support or direction or guidance regarding things like vocation and self-advocacy, not just health care. Okay. And you know, IEPs should include goals not only related to education and vocation, but also daily living, which includes self-management of health. Okay. And this is an example of a transition summary document. Okay. And so this is a list of some of the things that are important to include. And you know, I have some patients who, you know, generate these type of transfer documents and hand them to the physician at the first appointment, and this can really help organize and structure these initial healthcare encounters and make these initial appointments much more successful and productive if you have documents listing diagnoses, medications, allergies, procedures, recent laboratory or radiology tests, equipment, care providers, and community agencies. If you're transitioning from one physician to another within the same healthcare system with an integrated healthcare record, those top items, the diagnoses, medications, allergies, procedures, labs may be all there, so you don't, you know, that's taken care of. But often what's poorly documented in electronic healthcare records are things like equipment needs, other care providers, say if you have, you know, state-supported assistance, and community agencies that are involved in that young adult's life. Okay? Again, hammering home, transition is a process that ideally occurs during disease stability. You know, this should be a process that's well on its way by the time the teen is ending, you know, their teen years and entering young adult. You know, ideally, when you read the transition literature, and again, if you go to Got Transition website, they talk about these transition periods of time where you meet your future adult health provider and you start to develop relationship and learn, transfer information, learn about each other, and then you go back to your pediatric long-term healthcare provider, make sure that, you know, everything is occurring well, determine whether that pediatric healthcare provider needs to talk with or provide information to that adult care provider before full transition occurs. Does that happen most of the time? No, but ideally they talk about this transition process where there's this kind of period of time where you're going back and forth a little bit until you're securely in the adult healthcare world before you let go completely of the pediatric healthcare system. Okay. So issues of guardianship, of course, come up at this time in term, and again, how do you optimize autonomy as well as assuring safety as it relates to healthcare decision making? Okay.
Dr. Dr. Tyler, can you please talk about the guardianship issue?
So at the time,
Cons of
yeah,
what we talked about.
yeah, I mean,
Medical power of attorney versus
right.
home guardianship.
When a child reaches age 18, it's presumed that they have the capacity to make all decisions. And the situation that you don't want to occur is having a teen whom you know does not have cognitive capacity to make all healthcare related decisions and not making any provision for that, a reality. And then there's a healthcare crisis soon after turning 18, and then the physicians and healthcare providers are in a quandary about what to do. Do I listen to this young adult who clearly has some impairments but does not have a guardianship and does not have a durable power of attorney for healthcare? What do we do? And so you want to avoid that stress and strain and uncertainty. So having a durable power of attorney for healthcare is one way to preserve the maximum autonomy of the individual in adulthood, and assuring that a proxy decision maker is available if the decision at hand, healthcare decision at hand, is too complicated for the young adult with special healthcare needs to understand and judge and decide on. So, go ahead.